All right, we'll call the meeting to order. This is the third and final item on our agenda. Are there members from the ethics board here that are going to be sitting up front? If so, we're going to need everybody's name for the record. So we'll start with you, Mr. Birch. Attendance, you think? Attendance.
Birch. Assembly.
Amy Cont'd, Elvie Green Jackson,
Dick Drink, Bernie Hall, Tim Steele.
Adam Trumbull.
Bill Starr.
Linda Richardson, Municipal Hearing Officer,
David Nesbitt, member of the Board of Ethics.
And Keith Silver, member of the Board of Ethics.
All right. Well, Mr. Birch, this is your item. I know that there's been some changes that you plan on making. If you want to address what you plan on doing on Tuesday, and then the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the body for meeting in a committee of the whole work session here, and for the members of the Ethics Board to take their time here to meet as well. As many of you know, we basically initiated a look at about probably 6 weeks ago at the potential for changing municipal elections from April to a November date. The information that we have gathered and is prepared, actually it's in a chart on the wall behind the cameras, and it's also been in a handout here, and it illustrates what we see as a very significant objective for this community, and that's striving for a high turnout election. In the April 2013 election, we had roughly a 20% turnout, one of the lowest on record. And if you look back at the data, in 2004, we actually had an election that turned out about twice that many, about a 52% election when it was run concurrent with the state. As a consequence of that, we drafted an ordinance which basically revised the election date, and that was subsequently modified to reflect some modifications that were necessary to the ethics code. It was suggested by council, and actually during a prior meeting with the ethics board, that those two items should be separated, and so that's occurred. And what we have before you is ordinance AO 2013-157S, and that substitute basically deals only with the ethics component of what's in it. And if I might just read, the title of the ordinance has not changed, and that's a function of the fact that the clerk's office has indicated that you can't really change the title once you introduce something, even by deletion. So the title states, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly amending the Ethics Code, Chapter 115, allowing incumbent assembly member sponsorship and participation in the change of election date, and amending Anchorage Municipal Code Chapter 28 to change the time for the regular municipal election from the first Tuesday in April to a date to be determined. So while the title hasn't changed, the substitute version does remove the election date change from this legislation. It addresses only the amendment to the Ethics Code. The S version enacts Ethics Code amendments as described in the earlier Assembly memo and submitted with the original ordinance. In addition, the language of the amendment to the subsection 1.15 is changed to follow state statute, and the language of the code is changed for internal consistency with the subsection. Section 1 of the ordinance addresses a catch-22 situation that would otherwise prevent the Assembly from addressing critical public issues. The Ethics Board has weighed in with an advisory opinion on Assembly consideration of an election date change based on existing code. This was requested when it was recognized that a date change had the effect of extending every Assembly member's term, as well as the terms of school board members and the mayor. The opinion concludes that under the current Ethics Code, the introduction or deliberation of on an ordinance that changes the tenure of an incumbent Assembly member is an official action, and that the extended tenure is a substantial financial interest. The opinion concludes that no member can decide the conflict issue, and no member can introduce or deliberate. The Assembly routinely considers conflict of interest declarations by members when their vote to approve the city or school district budget would bring a substantial benefit to their household. Typically, only a single member has had a spouse or a household member working for the city or the school district, enabling the remainder of the body to consider and generally approve their participation. Were all members of the Assembly to have a household member working for the school district, we would find ourselves in a similar situation as with the election date change proposal. No one in the body could approve the school budget without being in conflict with the ethics code. Additionally, the code does not directly address how we decide an issue where we all may have a common financial or personal interest involved. For instance, we all pay taxes, yet routinely vote on budgets and mill levies. We all vote on redistricting measures and certify election results, and yet all personally can benefit from these actions. We all vote on ordinances and contracts that can change the benefits of being in office, including leave, health care, and other forms of compensation. The proposed ordinance will allow us to determine whether an interest held in common by us is insubstantial or outweighed by the common public good, so that we can proceed. The interpretation of current code means that no matter how great the public purpose, elected officials cannot even introduce, let alone discuss, legislation that may affect them personally. This is because the code fails to provide any mechanism that allows the body to consider the public-private benefits, even in the light of full disclosure, and even if the proposal contains specific measures to reduce or eliminate the private benefit. The public good is not served by a code that is focused on the private interest, but pays no attention to the public purpose and benefit that could be achieved. The S version of the ordinance amends Municipal Code, Section 1.15035B, to follow the state statute, which does not prohibit a member of the governing body from participation in an official action in which the member has a substantial financial interest. According to Alaska Statute 29.71.810, the governing body of the municipality is the assembly. Sponsorship and introduction of assembly legislation will continue to be an official action, but participation in such an action by an assembly member is allowed. Alaska statutes which apply to home rule municipalities state a municipal employee or official other than a member of the governing body may not participate in an official action in which the employee or official has a substantial financial interest. The emphasis added was other than a member of the governing body. The assembly will continue to rule in accordance with this code on a case-by-case basis whether each individual member is allowed to participate in an official action. So that, my friends, is the memorandum that transmits, and that defines the changes in the substitute. I don't know that I need to read the substitute into the record, but the thrust of that is to basically get us out of this situation where you have something that uniformly applies to all members, that it allows the body to take that measure up. We found that with the charter, a 6-member majority of the body can in fact change the date of the elections if that's determined through the public hearing process and the debate, that's a favorable action. That's happened twice before, in '89 and I believe again in 2000, when the date was changed by a week, and then in 1989 the date was changed from October back to April. This proposal speaks only to the ethics component of that ordinance.
And if I could, Mr. Birch, you, myself, Mr. Hall, and you met with Amanda Mosier, Barbara Jones, with the Lieutenant Governor, and Gail Fanumio. If you could just give a brief overview of that from what you understood that meaning.
As evidenced in the, this transition happened in about '89, and you can see that it's had a steady decline in voter turnout. And as a consequence, I did contact Gail Fanumii, who heads up the State Division of Elections, and inquired about voting data for them. And her indications were, and numbers indicate, that the state actually fluctuates between 50 and 60% turnout, or 65% turnout, depending on whether it's a presidential election or not. In 2004, when we actually had 2 school bonds voted by the state at their election, we had a 52% turnout, and that 52% turnout is basically better than anything we've realized. So we talked to Ms. Fanumii and the Lieutenant Governor about the potential for a concurrent election. Currently, the Denali Borough operates a concurrent election, and that's where you hold elections when people show up to the polls, and that would be the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And as a result, you see a dramatic increase in turnout. And it's that increase in turnout that that I would hope to realize by moving that election date to November. Ms. Panumiai and the Lieutenant Governor indicated that there are some changes that they have afoot, e-bill or e-book, e-poll book, and some other technologies that are underway. And they are going to be working closely with the municipal clerk and deputy clerk and Ms. Mosier on the issue of what needs to transpire. Obviously, kicking the election down the road from this April to November adds another 7 months of additional time to basically consider what changes are necessary for that concurrent election. One of the issues we talked about this morning was the state manages to use the electronic capability of the AccuVote optical scanning equipment to transmit that data from virtually every far-flung precinct in the state, or virtually all of them, to Juneau for tabulation. In Anchorage, we have kind of steered away from that, do some anecdotal discussions and indications that has been a problem. I would submit that there might be more potential for that electronic transmittal data to happen, and certainly in a concurrent election you would have the same people involved in both cases.
I have Mr. Trainee.
Thank you. Before I go, just want to start a couple questions. When I look at this document, see prepared by the Department of Law, did they do this or was this outsourced? And I've got the documents coming to me. I'm just asking a rhetorical question. Was this done in-house or outsourced?
Actually, it was in-house. Mr. Wheeler and his capable staff were assisting, as you might expect, through the holidays. It's been a little more challenging in that we have people have other commitments over the Christmas and New Year's week. But basically, the thrust of this and the preparation of this was by the Department of Law.
So none of it was done out of house by outside counsel?
No, none was drafted outside. I did contract for external counsel to solicit and review some aspects of this work.
So it was done out of house then?
Pardon me?
Nothing. Ethics Board, you ruled on this before. The version was sent to you. When did you receive this, and were you able to have a full, complete meeting on this? I'd like your recommendations. What day did you guys receive this?
I received this Friday afternoon.
This last Friday.
Yes.
Were you able to have a full meeting on this?
Our group met this morning, the three of us. We have a short staff because of the short meeting. We have people in Hawaii, people, other conflicts in their meetings. So we're not able to have a full group today. But we did have a quorum, and we met this morning.
So what was the results of your meeting? Can you tell us what you took a look at this, where are you heading on your recommendations to us on this?
Our recommendation on this is that we spend a little more time, deliberating on this. We don't have, we're at this particular point, we're still actually reacting from the previous set, and we're not necessarily in a mode where we're able to fully consider the changes and how they were. We're not necessarily declining it, but we're not accepting it either. So we really would appreciate a little more time to deliberate on this change.
How much more time are we talking about, sir? Because I value your opinion on this, and that's the reason for me asking you this question. You're not just an advisory board. We take very seriously your opinions when they come to us. They're well thought out. I want to know, how much time do you need?
Well, some in training through the chair, we've in the last change that actually has not made it through the assembly yet, with respect to amounts that were necessary, would be considered potential conflict of interest on, or amounts people can receive for gifts. That took us almost a year and a half. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're going to take that long at the time, but we spent a lot of time. We met with both, in that particular case, the school district and the assembly. Met with assembly a couple times on that issue. Met with this committee, and so for me to guess how long it's going to take, it's impossible. But even special meetings, we're a volunteer organization. We have to take time away from our work to do this. So I honestly, I can't give you an exact answer.
Okay. Thank you.
I wish I could.
Mr. Chairman, one other thing, the chart that's on the wall is an interesting chart. And I think when you transpose New York City onto that Shed election on the 1st November state election, they had to turn out 24%. So I think we're doing well compared to that large city. There is a trend across this country not to vote. I don't care where it's at, unless we change to vote by mail or electronic, it's not gonna help the situation, trying to move this, kick this can down the street about 7 to 8 months. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As some of you may know, there's been discussion for years now about changing the election back to the fall. So this is really nothing new. I think the issue is, at least for me, is the way that it is now being presented. I'd like to thank Mr. Burke for providing this colorful chart. It's easy to see and easy to read. But my question regarding the chart was the change of population taken into consideration when this chart was developed. And then on page 2 of the AM, unless I'm reading it wrong, it says we all vote on ordinances and contracts that can change the benefits of being in office, including leave, health care, and other forms of compensation. Well, first off, the Assembly doesn't get leave. Secondly, our compensation is determined by the Salaries and Emoluments Commission. So I really believe that statement is pretty inaccurate, as I said, unless I'm reading it wrong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Burch, you're on the list, but that'll be further.
Did you want me to respond to
You can respond when we get down that.
Okay.
Mr. Hall?
Yeah, I just want to be very clear. Mr. Trainee obviously is heading in a direction here in regards to outside counsel. Mr. Birch contacted me and asked if he could do that. He used his revenue that is basically his account. He had funds in there to use to seek outside counsel. But even before I signed off on that, I checked with in-house counsel, and they strongly recommended that Mr. Birch have the opportunity to do that. So the budget that was used for funding for this outside counsel was funds that were in Mr. Birch's account.
Mr. Starr?
And thanks for the clarification. That wasn't what I went in the queue for, but I inherently don't find any challenges with a member reaching forward, whether to do it financially or some other topic. So I hope that wasn't an interpretation that Mr. Trainee was referring that it was wrong to do it. And so I guess that was it. The S version has 2 topics, and I go through the chair really for 2 statements, and you did see it just Friday. I just basically looked at it today, but the line 17 through 22, and particularly lines 19 and 20, where it has the whereas statements that it says that the assembly members cannot sponsor an ordinance without prior ethics board review, in effect taking away power from the assembly. That was the first part of my inquiry. Is that what you see your decision saying to us? Because I'll tell you right now, I don't think that what I read from your first interpretation on the November change specifically that we had any requirement to send our perceived conflicts through you prior to introduction, whether it's good practice or not. But is this whereas statement accurate?
Go ahead. David Nesbitt on behalf of the board. The short answer is no, that was not our intent. My understanding from our opinion was that under these very unusual and unique circumstances where everybody had a potential conflict or had an obvious apparent conflict, that under these very specific circumstances, it created this inherent conflict that then needed to go through the ethics board. That's not, I mean, the assembly, in fact, our past history is to put everything back onto the assembly where possible. I mean, as far as the assembly has the inherent authority to determine its own conflicts. That is the way it is, and that's the way it should be, and we had no problem with that at all. That was not our intent in our ethics opinion. I think our ethics opinion, I of course will defer to the ethics opinion rather than my comments here today.
Well, and to me, the way I read that, it was more specific, and maybe I'm wrong, Mr. Birch, it seemed to me the question put to them was very finite and being ignorant and reciting it, but to me it seemed like you were requested to delve into the specifics of changing the elections in November, sponsored by an assembly member or us in general, which is now different. The question is different in our ability to just do it. So I guess that was where I heard your answer come earlier, through the chair in particular, was, you know, you hadn't had a chance to look at it yet, which, you know, now I know why, because it's a totally different question almost. Is that right?
May I respond to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And this is, I'll follow up with Chair Silver, what his comment was, and that is that we've been asked, originally we were asked to give an opinion on a very, very narrow, very specific issue. And I think it's pretty clear in the opinion that it was not meant to be interpreted broader than that. This came to us Friday afternoon, and we were also asked, as of 45 minutes ago, to completely disassociate our earlier opinion from what the changes were here, which is very difficult because, I don't mean to speak for the board, but I felt uncomfortable at the speed and the pressure that this came to us, because it's difficult to disassociate ourselves from our previous opinion and to create two separate issues. And from our perspective, whenever that happens, in order to give these amendments, which are totally different from what we considered earlier, a fair shake.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
and then we have to give ourselves time
and I
to
appreciate
separate
that, and
the
this
two issues.
comment maybe have some unintended statements. I think this question that's in front of us is less an ethical question, to where it doesn't even perhaps require a ruling on whether or not it's the case, because we're talking about policy and ordinance change and administrative changes to either code or charter, as some of these folks are saying. So to me, it's as a legislator in particular, I've been on the body for a while, I am concerned about sort of the ethical boundaries that you may have an action that could potentially be damaging to the public because you're conflicted out or something like that. That's a very valid reason. This one, to me, seems to, we're preserving our right to change it. So, you know, not be so flippant as to say, as I wouldn't necessarily value the opinion as high as I would, say, for the November question, as preserving that. Is it still a valid question, even though on the surface review, is it still a valid question that it should come to the ethics board, this whole S change? Does it need to? Put it to you that way. Because essentially, and I'll restate it a little bit, essentially we're talking about sort of a standard ordinance change, or in however friction that may be to the public changing an ordinance. It doesn't seem like we routinely go to you guys for ordinance changes.
This would be my response.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is that even though these two issues have been separated for purposes of our analysis, or the ethics opinion, and I'm going to put this in the context too of the fact that we really appreciate that the Assembly has come to us for an opinion, right? I mean, the Assembly has its own power to do what it wants to do.
Yeah, and don't misinterpret my qualifying statements in that either.
And so I want to make sure that when we give an opinion, we appreciate the opportunity to give an opinion, and we appreciate the Assembly's review of that opinion. Within that context, I think it's impossible not to look at this without seeing its reference to the subsequent legislation that will be proposed following this. I mean, I don't think there's any question, and I don't think it's stated that if this were to go through, then immediately following this would be the...
Well, and that's the question that I
Right.
think would be more valid to bring to the ethics board. So
That's-
you were saying where I was going, was it, you
Yes.
know, is this really the one that we want the ethics discussion to really occur on, and not necessarily, again, more of that focused question?
I think these are tied very closely together. I think it would be very difficult to separate these two. And we've been asked to separate them, and I think it's very challenging for us to
Thank you for
separate
the
them.
answer. Did you have anything to say, Mr. Birch? I wasn't trying to make it a debate, but...
He's next on the...
Okay.
No, I appreciate the comments, and as to the issue, I think in December of 2011, Assemblyman Trainee sponsored a ballot, I believe it was a ballot question that would provide service disabled vets a benefit, of which he is one, and so he reasonably went to the ethics board. The board's view is that sponsorship of an ordinance is an official action, so this Kafkaesque gap in the code is a very real possibility. As such, the board cannot defer to the Assembly on potential conflict cases regarding sponsorship of ordinance. Therefore, potential conflicts of interest should be disclosed to the Board of Ethics for review for sponsorship. And I think what it points to is, and I was actually on the body in 2006 when we went through a great public discussion on the ethics code. My good friend Ken Stout was on the body and actually chaired that committee. And that 55-page document was adopted in 2006. I can assure you there was no discussion in my memory of, well, what is this going to do to the charter prescribed responsibility of the assembly to change the municipal election dates as they've done twice before. And that conversation didn't happen. So what this basically proposes to do is to take us back to a point in time pre-2006 when the 55-page ethics code was adopted, and basically permit the kind of discussion that really needs to happen in a public forum with full disclosure. And in my view, the compelling issue here is the turnout, the savings and costs and efficiency of a November election over an April election. So the proposal that you see, the substitute, addresses that. And I think Mr. Starr is correct in that as a code change, it warrants a public debate, dialogue, discussion, but I'm not entirely sure that it's in the purview, although under our code, we can ask for counsel and seek guidance and an opinion from the ethics board.
Well, I guess, and we were debating a little bit, but this is, as I've been reminded, it's a change to the ethics code, however, though. So I guess I want to make sure the two topics are separated, that more to the principle of the matter would be that, but whether we change some other part of the ethics code, I want to basically go on record that I think it's appropriate. I was here with Mr. Stout's efforts as well to the entail there, and I think it is necessary that if we change the ethics code, that does go to the ethics board. I guess that was more discussion about the topic under the discussion of the election itself when I make my general comments. So just know the nuances there, and you're trying to change the ethics code. So I think there is some value to what they say.
And I would agree with that. And I think there's an earlier discussion about the chart and the population change. The statistics that were plotted out are basically from municipal election records and reflect the voter turnout against the total number of registered voters. So when you see clearly the population changed, but the percentages reflect the percentage. Obviously, in 1975, there's a whole lot fewer people in the Anchorage metropolitan area than there are today.
And Mr. Trainee?
Just that you're right, I did bring something forward, and I gave it to Ethics Board, and they gave me a ruling, so I made sure the ordinance was written. It eliminated my ability to ever put in for it. So I took what they told me, and I didn't try to change the Ethics Board to take that ability away from them. That concerns me when we're telling the Ethics Board, we don't want to hear what you have to say on this. We're going to take it away from your ability to even give us an opinion on it.
On what, Mr. Trainee, the election itself or the change to the code?
By taking away from the Ethics Board, you're saying you're not dealing with, this is not dealing with election, this is taking this ability of the Ethics Board away from to rule on this issue.
I'm still confused. When you say, what are we trying to take away? You're basically
Your ability
referring
to tell us whether this is ethical or not, whether this is something that an assembly member should be able to bring forward. I have no problem with the Ethics Board telling us that, because I don't think the state ethics law is correct. That's the reason we've got people down there voting on aces that work for the oil company, because the state tells them it's not a problem.
I'm not trying to debate. I'm trying to understand what you're trying to say here. I'm trying to find out
say it's wrong
two
to
questions are in front of us right now from me.
What I'm telling you is, from my perspective, it's wrong to take this away from the Ethics Board.
What are we taking away when you say
Taking
that?
them away to be able to even tell us if this is ethical or not. They've already told us.
When you say it, now is it the November or is it this change here to the
This
ethics?
change
Okay,
here.
thank you.
Not the November one, this
All right.
change here.
All right, fair.
Mr. Hall?
Yeah, I'm assuming the topics before us are two. One is the ethics change, the other is the election. And, I want to share, and now I'm speaking as chair and the person that has responsibility working directly with the clerk's office in regards to running and managing elections. And we had a great meeting with the Lieutenant Governor and his staff in regards to being able to do an election together. And where we came away from there, and I think the Lieutenant Governor gained a little knowledge in this process as well, the thought at first, and the Lieutenant Governor's made the statement, if there's a way that we can jointly do elections and save money, they're all open to do that. But when we got into the meeting and sit down and had the conversation, it's pretty obvious that that's not an easy task to accomplish. You can run an election that coincides or is concurrent with the state, but everybody needs to be very clear if that happens. There's two elections going on at the same time. The state's having an election, the municipality is having an election. We both have to man the precincts because we've got to manage our register. They have to manage their register. And at one point during the conversation, I actually, a bit with humor, suggested to the Lieutenant Governor that maybe since we were such a large community, that maybe the state would just let us do their election instead of them doing ours, because we're doing it concurrently. And needless to say, that was shot down fairly rapidly, because reality at the end of the day is the state's liable for their election and we're liable for our election. And they are not going to any way move that responsibility, that if something goes wrong, you know, well, it was the city's fault. That won't work. And it's going to be the same way with our election if it goes wrong. So if we're looking at doing that, the clerk's office, and believe me, they're really not trying to be obstructionist in this. They're coming off of the 2012 election that went very, very badly. We came back with our next election that, you know, went well, but some major issues and questions that arose within that one, such as people voting out of precincts, et cetera. So in order for us to do this, we're looking at a fairly significant investment of dollars, because that's going to mean that the municipality would need to acquire 135 machines to count votes, whether it's AccuVote or some other optical scanner. Something the clerk's office would ask that maybe consideration be given is go to a mail-in vote as opposed to, if we're going to buy equipment, something that we could go to mail-in ballots. So another thing to be given consideration to. You're looking at needing to acquire the machines to be able to do the vote. We got to look at twice the pool of election workers, because we will need to man our precincts just as the state does. You're looking at double the pool of individuals involved. And it's just extremely challenging. They're not saying that it can't be done, but they really have concerns about the fact that we've been working very hard to regain credibility with the community and do not want to do anything that will risk that. At the same time, when we're talking about being able to get more people to turn out to an election, I don't think there's any of us that would not like to see that happen, however we're able to accomplish that. But the one thing that I do know that we have done checks on is the Denali Borough is 1,800 voters, 5 precincts. 4 of the precincts are counted by hand. They do have their own AccuVote machine that one precinct is counted through the AccuVote machine. So basically, that entire district is smaller than one of our precincts, or equivalent to some of our individual precincts. So this is a big task that needs to be accomplished, and my guess would be with a fairly significant fiscal note that would be attached to it for the equipment that would be necessary. The clerk's office is working on getting that information together, and hopefully we're going to have all of that done this week. When we agreed, when we left the meeting, the agreement was that our clerk's office would work very closely with the Lieutenant Governor's election office in talking about what we can and what we can't do together and how we could possibly make it do. The one thing that the Lieutenant Governor and I both said was, we absolutely don't want to get to an election and somebody say, we didn't see that coming. So a lot of things to be considered and thought that would need to go into it. So just a perspective on the meeting with the Lieutenant Governor. It would be concurrent or coincide with the state election. I don't think you will find out that there's probably going to be any connectivity to the state election other than it's occurring at the same time.
Mr. Nesbitt, you have?
I just had a quick comment. I wanted to, I know it's obvious from our opinion, but it bears repeating that our opinion has nothing to do with the underlying merits of this proposed legislation as to the voter turnout issue. It's hard, but based on our conversation here, it's hard to disassociate the two. That was my point from earlier. The second point I want to make is that and this follows up with Assemblyman Trainey's comment, and that is that the opinion has an out at the end. If the effective date of the proposed legislation is past a certain date, then there is no ethical conflict, and there's no reason to change the code. And that's similar to, I think, what Assemblyman Trainey was trying to say. I just want to make sure that that is written in the advisory opinion, and I want to make sure for those who haven't had a chance to review it that is an option too.
Mr. Trump, if I may.
Follow up on that?
Well, actually, I intended to open my comments with the fact to the Ethics Board as well as the Election Commission. I can't tell you how much I appreciate what you do. And unfortunately, no matter what I do, the community will never really get a full understanding of what it is that you do. You guys are not compensated. You put in a tremendous amount of time. And we ask some really tough questions of you. And the one thing that I apologize more than anything else, if ever there's the indication that we're rushing you to come to a conclusion, that should be the last thing that we ever do, is try to rush a decision. You need to have the time necessary to be able to logic your way through some of the mysteries that we throw at you. I know that all of us elected officials genuinely have the opinion when we're elected, we are bestowed all of the knowledge in the world, and if we say it, it must be so. What I've come to find out as the chairman is that's not even close to the truth. No matter what I do, I have to follow municipal code, and I try to stay within legal guidelines to the best of my ability. So thank you for what you do, and I encourage you, don't be rushed. Do what you need to do to make the right decision for this community, not for us. And the same thing to your election workers. I mean, we were having all kinds of conversation in an earlier meeting about you and people watching, and I know you don't have a problem with people being in and observing or being poll watchers, but there's parameters that need to be there, because you come in and you do that job once a year, you do it one day a year, and is everybody going to get it perfect? Absolutely not. Even those that do a job on a regular basis still make mistakes, and that's why all of these things in place are necessary to make this process work. But at the same time, we shouldn't do anything in there that's going to cause you an extreme pressure, because you're under enough to start with. So again, thank you for what you do, and please be tolerant of us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dombowski?
Thank you. And actually, Chairman Hall articulated, I was going to ask about the Denali borough election, because my question was about the concurrent, or was it on the same ballot, and it was concurrent, so you didn't answer that. But my question to Mr. Birch is, this school bond prop in '04, was that an actual question that was run on a state ballot?
I believe it was run actually on the state ballot as a special election, and it was, there's two school bond issues, and they were, we have pulled that up. There's supposed to be a copy of the memorandum of agreement, or MOU, memorandum of understanding, that describes how that process worked. And we're hope to get a copy of that from the statewide division.
I'd like to find a little more information on that, because, I mean, common sense, and I've had people say to me, why can't you just run them at the same time? I hear what Chairman Hall says, that it's our responsibility to run city elections, but that's something I think worth following up on. The other comment I'd just like to ask the Ethics Commission about, Mr. Birch has raised an interesting thing, in my opinion, is this catch-22 that he's raised, where if you have a significant issue of public concern, yet it's deemed that assembly members have some sort of private interest. In your view, is there ever a time when public interest should outweigh the private interest? I mean, what I see in front of us is some are arguing that we can't even discuss this topic. But if we can look at and say we can increase voter turnout by 30%, I think there's a significant public interest in not to be able to even talk about it. It's alarming to me. So I would just like you to comment on that catch-22, whether it's this topic or another topic. I'd like some sort of perspective, I guess.
I have a couple of points. I think I can keep these straight. The second, the first issue that I want to raise, and you can follow with what I have to say, and that is that I don't think that the catch-22 in this had to do with the specific instance of the proposed change in the elections being done while the assembly is currently, for the sitting current members. There's no problem with having a debate under our interpretation of the code if the effective date is a later date. That's what was done before. In the late 80s, early 90s, the election was changed to April, and the effective date was 2 to 3 years after the proposed legislation was enacted. So there's nothing that prevents the debate. And I'm sorry, what was your first point too? There was
It was just if you have any topic that is of significant public
Oh.
interest, yet assembly members have private interest,
Right.
what mechanism is there for because in my opinion, when I read the ethics opinion, it doesn't appear that you guys can weigh that.
I think that, and this was an issue that actually came up, and I wish that Mr. Carlson were here because this is something that he brought up, and that is that under circumstances of an emergency such as the earthquake, 64 earthquake, for example, these things were bypassed. Public interest was a consideration. Things were done to take care of that emergency in 1964 to accommodate the needs of the city at that time. I don't have anything further to comment. So I don't think that there was a blanket prohibition. I think that there was room, but I hesitate to get into that area too much without further review.
And the only thing I would have to add, and pretty much in the answer, was it really was mostly a matter of timing. We appreciate, I mean, you do vote on your own reapportionment. That's going to affect you the next election. It doesn't affect you immediately, right? I mean, you vote on the apportionment, you know, somebody who might be sitting in the same district as, you know, you and some person Jackson could all of a sudden be in the same district, and then one of you just loses your seat automatically. That doesn't happen. That affects the next election. And the same thing, so that's why we gave the, in our opinion, we said, well, it is a matter of timing that you can do this. We appreciate that there are many other conflicts, and you folks all disclose it. We quite often, several members here have asked us for an advisory opinions about a potential conflict that they have, and we've pushed it back to the Assembly saying, disclose it to the Assembly. The Assembly as a body will make their decision. And I appreciate that everybody had a potential conflict here, and the out that we gave you on that was to move the election, or move the effective date of the change of election.
So just to kind of reformulate what you said, with the identification of a catch-22 potentially in code, taking it away from this particular issue, does the ethics board recognize that there is or is not a catch-22? Or are you saying maybe there is a catch-22, but if it was really an important issue, it would be dealt with under emergency situations? Do you see where I'm going?
This is what we spent the majority of our time talking about in our meeting this morning.
Oh, good.
Was
So
that,
I'm right on
was
board.
exactly that point, but we need some more time to contemplate that. We see the conflict, but we also are resistant to at least being able to give you an official opinion of what our board is in a short period of time that we have. I mean, the Assembly takes a long time to deliberate. We'd like to be able to give you folks, a better evaluation.
I am not a member of the board. I assist Deannis in advising the board and kind of reiterating what's already been said. Our initial reaction, kind of just the gut feeling that can formulate in the short time allowed, is that increasing voter turnout's a long-term goal getting shoehorned into a rushed time frame. And so, is it a catch-22 or is it a jumping the gun? And we haven't really been able to fully flesh that out.
Now, just to follow up on that, is that an ethics consideration or is that a policy call?
Well, when
Because to me now the ethics board is going into it, you're making a judgment on policy versus.
but in order to have a full discussion of the ethics implications, the board doesn't have to divorce themselves of their knowledge and ways of the world. They're allowed to use their common sense.
Oh, sure.
And so that's why it really merits a complete and full discussion. And that's why a 1-hour meeting is not sufficient. The other point is, a lot of the other examples mentioned in the discussion part prior to the actual proposed ordinance use items that are driven by or reviewed by outside forces. So when you have redistricting, that's not the assembly person coming forward and saying, I need a new district. And so when you have other items, such as the earthquake, those emergency things, that's not coming sua sponte from within the assembly, it's coming externally. And so that's also something to consider, which once fully discussed may or may not be a completely valid distinction, but it, once again, it merits a very full discussion.
Great comments, thank you.
Mr. Trady.
Thank you. I appreciate this discussion because ethics board is something we take seriously. There are a few of us on this body. We did this, remember, we went from 5 pages to 55 pages. We appointed a committee. We had Ellen Teshi on it. We had Pam Jennings on it. We had Ken Stout on it. They gave us a good document. Like I said, when I take a look at the way the state does their ethics, I'm amazed that they let the people that work for oil companies vote on oil legislation, but that's them. But I got a question for you. If we propose action on this ethics change until our first meeting in April, will that give you guys time to come back to us with your opinion on this version of it?
Well, so in training, I can't have no ability to help schedule what you do.
Oh, I'm asking, if we
Yeah.
postpone it
Well,
till April,
I believe we could probably have an opinion prior to April.
that's what I want to know. Thank you, sir. It's the answer I needed. Appreciate it.
Mr. Burke. Well, for those that are interested in kicking this can farther down the road, I guess you'd ask for an opinion maybe next year in April as opposed to this coming April. My objective is that we do not need to go through another election cycle with a 20% turnout as we experienced last year. The very reasonable approach to doing this is basically to modify as the Assembly has in the past. It's entirely legal. There's been some aspersions as to the, it not being ethical, but as we've discussed, there's no potential for really truncating terms, so it's an issue. Now, the Ethics Board sits as a quasi-judicial body with subpoena powers within the city, so it's kind of like having the judges and the judiciary in front of this body. And I think the distinction I see is that the body has a responsibility to consider code revisions that are necessary to do the public's work. And again, in my view, the merits of an election, I'm not entirely convinced we need to buy 120 new AccuVote machines. I think that mechanism can be worked out with the state of Alaska. But while I certainly appreciate the engagement the Ethics Board has brought to the subject, I think the fact is that from a policy standpoint, the greater good is served by having an election held in November when you actually have people show up and you have, instead of a 40,000 voter turnout, you have 80,000. I think that public issues are best served by having a high voter turnout. Thank you.
Mr. Flood? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, just if I recall correctly, Ms. Ray Jackson
take effect until they are reelected. So, sort of the precedent around the delayed effective date. I had a question about the meeting with the Lieutenant Governor's office. It's been sort of nagging at me. We have a lot of different service areas in Anchorage, particularly on the hillside, but also out in Jewett River. Mr. Trombley, perhaps you were there. Could you comment on their thoughts on how that might be handled given this? Is that why concurrent elections are required as opposed to putting us all on the same ballot?
The discussion that we had was, because I think at the last election we had 43 different ballots, is that correct, Amanda? 43 different ballots for the municipal election. So what the idea was that, the precincts for the state and the municipality are all the same except for one, Mr. Jackson and Mr. Trainey's area. There's a split precinct there, but other than that, our precincts match up. And so that's why you would have two separate registers. You'd be running concurrent elections, and you vote the municipal ballot, you vote the state ballot. The state ballot would be run through the AccuVote machine or whatever machine they're currently using. The municipal ballot would be put in a separate secure box, so that when all the ballots for the state election were done being run, you would then change out the computer chip to read the municipal ballot. You stick that in, and then you'd run all the municipal ballots through the AccuVote machine with that. So that's why you have to run concurrent, because of the idea of putting everything on one single ballot was not realistic.
Ms. Moser's trying to get our attention here.
Just one other thing, you spoke about the limited road service areas. The other concern with municipal elections is fire service area, park service area, road service areas. If we have any bond issues relating to any of those, it creates a separate ballot style for people who live in the road service area and people who live out of the road service area.
I start with service areas generally.
Yeah, just breaking it down a little bit further to understand the complexity of it. It's not just the limited road service areas.
Is that all, Mr. Flynn?
That's all I had.
Mr. Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that everybody recognizes that we need to work really hard to increase voter turnout, period. Nobody denies that. And I really think that things are moving along too fast. I really feel that this is a big enough subject that we need to establish a task force that involves all the stakeholders and figure out what we need to do to really increase voter turnout. And that beautiful spreadsheet really doesn't tell me anything. It really doesn't. And frankly, as an assembly member currently running for re-election, I would feel really, really uncomfortable if my term was extended till November. I just don't think that that's right. I don't think it's fair to my constituents. And I don't know how anybody else feels about it, but I just think that it's wrong and we need to spend some more time. We need to do this right. So often we do things not the right way, and then we get egg on our face. And I don't want to see that happen at all. I want to see us do this right. What's the rush? There's no need to rush this through right now. It just isn't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, that was my point as well. There is no rush to do this. It needs to be done in a thoughtful manner. Just consider the fact that both the municipality and the school district have bonds on the ballot. If you're going to move it now from April to November, you lose a construction season. We've got 6 people up for re-election on this election. If you move that to November, then when you start your budget process at the end of the year, you've got a majority, you potentially have a majority of the assembly brand new going through the budget process. It is of significance that we need to take some time on dealing with it and make sure that we're considering all the options and all the effects of making this change.
Mr. Boston?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been a little while since I've read the ethics opinion, so forgive me if I'm recalling it incorrectly. But I seem to remember the feeling of basically assembly members had a conflict of interest because they could stand to potentially financially gain. Is that so?
We would.
Would gain. I think there is a slight difference.
Okay.
It's a financial gain and private interest. So you have reputation and other private interests that are imputed on you as an assembly person. I mean, it's not like you get free parking downtown here, but you have as financial as well as private interest.
Because my initial thought when I heard this come up, and I heard the argument about voter turnout, I personally, for years, have always believed the election should be in the fall, because if you go back and read the charter says they're in the fall. It's pretty simple. So, in my opinion, I've always felt like, when I first heard this, I thought, great, I'll waive all pay, all benefits. 7 months, I don't care, I'll do this for free, because that's the reason I got involved. And then I was told, no, you can't do that, because you still have a private interest. But, so am I to say, I have no health benefits, no pay, I mean, it costs me money to do this job already. But, so the ethics board has already determined, essentially, even if there's no pay, no benefits, because you're an assembly member, there's a significant private interest. Is that correct?
That was part of our decision in the last decision. Someone Birch offered to go without pay for the extension. It's actually longer than 7 months, because I believe
It's April to
replacement's gonna
November,
be
it's
as
7
well.
months.
But I believe you didn't have people replacing, coming on the board until first week of January, at least in the original version I saw. So, but because it sounded like a perfect option, and we were advised by council, well, wait a minute, there are private interests as well.
And has the board taken a position, though, those interests are significant? Because I think the code reads significant private interest, not just any private interest. Because I can have an interest, but I could be in a large group, and so my interest is diminished. So, past precedent has shown that bodies let me participate in a lot of things, because I have a private interest, but it's diminished because I'm a part of a large group. So, has the board made a decision in that? That's what I'm trying to understand all of this and figure out really where you guys were coming from.
Well, given the code that we had, and going through the code, it talks about significant financial and private interest. And it was, this was the code that was generated in 2006. The previous election changes were done prior to this code. And we have to divorce the election, the potential election change from whether or not somebody could, when we did that, we really couldn't look at whether or not there was an potential election change. We only had to look at, could somebody sponsor legislation? And then when we started in our discussions, we found, oh, well, geez, everybody's gonna have a conflict. We gave you an out on that. Have an election that doesn't affect that particular term. It could be the next term in the next election, because we don't, all due respect to all of you, you don't know that you're gonna be elected, re-elected.
Don't know if you're going to run. I can tell you that. I appreciate that. This is my first go-round, so I'm just trying to figure out how everything works together.
Yeah, I just respond, Rick.
Yeah.
The short answer is yes. Right? I mean, we had this very exact debate, because Assemblyman Birch brought this up. I'll forego everything financial to myself. Does that absolve of the potential conflict? And we went through this debate and decided that yes, it was. It was private interest. There's more than just salary, benefits, those types of things.
Thank you.
Just
Yes,
a
Mr. Burns, you have 3 minutes.
Well, I don't think you need that. Point of clarification, if you have this handout, the dates on the chart, in my rush to get this to the printer here, it actually should be 75 on the left-hand side, and it should terminate with 2013 on the bottom. So it's correct on the flip side in the black and white chart, and my apologies.
Are there any other comments? With that, we're adjourned.